So, hi everybody, welcome back to Law Hero. My name is Jen and I make videos about the law and all things concerned about the law. And today we're talking about why you fail an interview. Now this is a synopsis of everything I've learned over the last few years, and I have failed at interviews many times myself. So this is not only my own personal experience, but it's also from being at the other side of the table. And to be honest with you, a lot of the time it really does come down to your personality, which is annoying because you're stuck with yourself, essentially. And that is a hard pill to swallow. It comes with kind of, the older you get, the more comfortable you become with yourself and the idea of the self and the ego. All of these things come into it, but I suppose at the end of the day, it kind of matters how much you care about the role you're going for, how much you trust yourself, and you know that you're able to take it if you are rejected on the basis of your personality, because a lot of the time competency is a given. If you're not called to interview, it's usually that you don't have enough experience, aka competency, in the role. And when you get to interview, usually what it is to check that you're not just good on paper, that you're sociable, you're able to get on with people, you're able to answer questions, that you're socially competent. So I would say that your competency as regards the role will be checked with CV, cover letter, or like in my case I had to do some exams, numerical ability, cognitive ability. Right now I don't seem like I have any cognitive ability, but I swear sometimes I do. It's just it's the end of the day, come on. So I've done all those kind of like testing parts on my YouTube channel already. Check them out. If you need some cognitive numerical testing materials, just email me at info@lawhero.eu. The third one I've written down is that sometimes other people are just better. And I know that sounds really blasé, but I remember like when I was in primary school, somebody said to me, no matter where you go or no matter what you do, there may always be someone better than you. And although this seems like a very sobering thing to say to a 7-year-old, it always stuck with me. And it's not that there's always a cop-out, it just means that sometimes you can try really hard, i.e. to the best of your ability, and still you may be beaten, and you have to be okay with that. I remember maybe 2 years ago, there's a video on my YouTube channel called How to Deal with Failure, or How to Deal with Rejection. And I made that video after being rejected romantically, but actually I realized that it would serve me really well in the workplace, and indeed anywhere really. And it was something which was quite philosophical, which was that we get butt hurt, or our ego is hurt when we're rejected, because basically you've put yourself, your sense of self is being attacked. And obviously if your sense of self is attacked, that is something that you're going to have to deal with. But what I discovered was that it was narcissistic to expect always to be accepted. And this was something I think traditionally I would have seen as a given, that I would be taken on by any employer because I have so much to give. But that's my point of view, and it's a narcissistic one. And then when I actually peel back the layers, I realized that this ideal has come from the millennial way of thinking, which is an entitled one. The baby boomers didn't have such an entitlement mentality. So when I peeled back all those layers and I understood that it was a belief that's not just only generational, but also may come from a sense of my own arrogance and egotism, may also be just being the eldest child and that kind of a thing, then I was able to approach the situation far more rationally. I'm speaking very candidly here because honestly, your first rejection is the one you won't forget, but it's also how you handle it is pivotal to how you will go on, because your attitude governs your altitude. I've made is general language and appearance. Unfortunately, and this happened to me when I went to a Japanese company, they didn't like me because they thought I was too casual. And the funny thing is that I've been for other interviews and they said I was too formal. So it depends sometimes around the culture of the employer you're going to. In my experience, Chinese, Japanese, and German clients or employers, they do require a certain standard of, I guess, formality, especially in the German sense. And this is just something you kind of have to deal with. I would say in Ireland, we're far less formal than other jurisdictions when it comes to interviewing. That being said, you could get an old school interviewer, you know, who likes the tie, who likes the shirt buttoned up. If you're a lady, likes this kind of way. Some people don't like certain hairstyles. But the problem with all of that is you do weaken your employability pool. I would say, I mean, the most strategic thing is to be middle of the road. Don't be too extreme. Don't be too boring either. More than anything, be yourself, but try and somehow adapt yourself to the culture of who you're interviewing with. Ultimately, if the culture is too far outside your ballpark, in that, like for example, in the Chinese, Japanese example I gave, like I worked for a Chinese company as well, I found the culture was too far removed from who I was and it didn't align with my values. And I felt that from the off, but ultimately it didn't work out. And since then I've only worked with German companies because I feel more familiar with them and their way of doing things. That's for me an indication of what I'm comfortable with. But you may not be comfortable with those. It depends on your experience. It depends on your knowledge. Some people will only work with UK and Irish companies because that's what they're familiar with. Some people find the American companies quite abrasive, and they also expect a lot in terms of workload because there's a different culture. So culture is everything. You may just not fit it. You may try to fit it and still miss the mark. It's just sometimes something outside of your control. The next area is explaining gaps in your CV. Please be prepared for this because a shrewd interviewer will ask it not only to find out what the gap is, but to watch your reaction and to see if you're truthful. So just be wary of that. At the end of the interview, if somebody doesn't ask any questions, that for me is a red flag that they haven't done their research. They're not really that interested or passionate about the role. So just be very careful of that. At the same time, don't just ask a question for question's sake. Show that you're interested through, you know, some unique question that nobody else will have asked, something that's quite specific to the business, something that shows your interest, I would say. And then I made some general notes on just like watching some candidates. So unfortunately, if you're extremely nervous to the point where, you know, your voice is wobbling, you're shaking, that will unfortunately make the people on the other side of the table quite uncomfortable. There's no silver bullet to fix nervousness when it comes to public speaking. Indeed, I myself have suffered down through the years. Again, it comes from psychological issues. It comes from, if you really want to get down to it, it comes from fear of being kicked out of the tribe or being exposed. Basically, your psychological underbelly is being exposed. By the way, when we talk up like this. You're seeing my whole underbelly. So when you actually speak in public, you're quite exposed. It's a very vulnerable position you're in physically. So if you understand that, then you'll understand why with public speaking that you'll have the physiological reaction in that. You'll have the classic anxiety type symptoms, fight or flight, all of that. Once you understand the science behind why people freak out about public speaking so much, that does take some of the edge off it. Indeed, for me, that certainly understanding the science behind why things happen definitely brings a layer of calm to me. I guess my biggest tip when it comes to doing an interview is remember that you're there to communicate a message, and the same goes for public speaking. And somebody said that to me years ago when I was a trainee solicitor. They were like, you know, don't let you get in the way of the message being relayed. Like right now, for example, I have a headache. Like I'm making this video for you, but I have a headache. You would never know I had a headache unless I told you I had a headache, because the message is this video is why you fail at interviews. If I was to relay how I really feel, that would take away from the message. So what I'm doing is I'm concentrating as best I can to relay the message. It's definitely something that comes with practice. It's a skill, and I would encourage you, go to Toastmasters, make YouTube videos, speak as much as you can on topics you're passionate about, and that will certainly help your public speaking. I hope I didn't make you uncomfortable. It's not that worst headache, like I'm drinking tea and stuff just to make it go away, but what I'm trying to say is, like, I have a job to do right now. I need to record this video because the sun is about to go down, and it's the same with public speaking. You usually have a job to do and you need to get it done, and you need to put yourself to one side to get the job done. That's what's helped me down through the years. I hope it helps you. Sometimes the preliminary interview will be dubbed a chat, get to know you. Please don't underestimate this, and don't let your guard down. I'm not saying be formal and be all pent up. What I'm trying to say is realize that it's being called a chat in order to lull you into a false sense of security, but be under no illusion. It is certainly an interview. It is used to shortlist candidates, and yeah, take it very seriously. Don't take it seriously at your peril. So the next bullet point I have written down is commercial versus academic. You have to know in the role you're going to be in, is it a hands-on role where you're expected to do project management, you're expected to execute on a daily basis, or is it a more academic research role where, you know, daily execution isn't really required, it's more long-term research, long-term building. So many times I have seen people go for roles that wasn't suited to their their natural state. Me, for example, I'm like half and half. I'm half a project manager, half a researcher. I'm neither 100% of both. That's why being an in-house counsel suits me very well, because I'm able to balance the two. However, if you were an out-and-out academic, being an in-house counsel would not be the role for you. It would be too hands-on. For me, being an out-and-out project manager or some kind of a lead in a department where, daily KPIs had to be met wouldn't suit me, because that's not how I operate. I have a more kind of a medium term operative in my head. So you have to kind of know where your strengths and weaknesses lie. Don't go for an academic role if you're not an academic, and don't go for a practical role if you're not all that practical. The next area is over talking. Now, this is something which is very awkward from the point of view of an employer, where you ask a question and it is not answered succinctly. It is really embarrassing to have to be interrupted, and please don't let that happen to you. If you're being interrupted in an interview, that is not a good sign. It means that you've gone off on a tangent and that the employer is trying to cut you off. This is a really bad sign, because what will happen is they will garner an impression that you are not able to rein in your thoughts. If you can't do so in an interview, there's no way you're going to be able to do it in the workplace. This happened to me when I was much younger, and I didn't understand social cues. Also didn't have that much emotional intelligence, nor did I have a good sense of self or personal knowledge, but once I was able to hone it in, it certainly made a difference to my success rate at interview. So yeah, I would say just have some awareness. That being said, I've seen people who are much older than me not been able to control themselves when it comes to answering questions. So I guess it's just a point of self-reflection rather than age. Understanding the role well. This is just it seems very, very obvious, but you would be quite surprised, especially when you're on the other side and the person doesn't understand the role they've gone for. It's very, very disappointing. It's a waste of everyone's time. It's like you're doing a dance, but the dance is going nowhere, and it's just a big no-no. You're definitely not going to get the job if you don't understand the role you're applying for. The next one is to be proactive about challenges in the role. Ultimately, there is going to be challenges in the role. It's not going to be a bed of roses. But what's really impressive from the point of view of an employer is if a candidate is able to proactively set out what they deem to be the challenges based on their perception of the business from the outside in. It's really impressive when they're actually correct about what the challenges are. And you can draw that judgment from, you know, observing newspapers, from looking at the company's website and coming to some kind of reasonable judgment of what the future holds for that business. It's really, really compelling for an employer. It shows empathy and it shows definitely someone you're willing to work with. Try not to be negative in your interview. So for example, if the employer is discussing something like, oh, you will be expected to do this type of work. I have heard some people say, well, I wouldn't like to do that type of work all the time. I wouldn't like to be pigeonholed. That may be true, but it's not strategic at interview to say that to the employer. You're trying to get in the door. So at the interview stage is not the time to be making those kind of assertions. If you don't want to be pigeonholed, the best time is to talk to your employer about that after you've gotten the role. Some people might say that that's disingenuous, but my argument is you're obviously interested in the role. There's sometimes a little bit of give and take when it comes to roles. Like me, for example, in my current role, I'm doing areas of law I've never done before, but also I'm doing areas which are very familiar to me. It's called give and take. It is good for your CV to branch into areas you haven't gone into before. By all means, of course, if you don't want to be pigeonholed, then you shouldn't be applying for that role. But I wouldn't be already knocking some of the requirements of the role in the interview. If you don't want to do that role, you shouldn't have applied for interview. The start of the interview is very, very important for setting the tone and setting the scene as to who you are. But my advice would be to make it as succinct as possible. So don't be like, my name is Jennifer, I come from Cork, I have a dog and a cat, and I live in a hat under a tree in the sea. Like, we don't want to know everything. We just want to know, this is the role I'm currently in. This is like a brief history of my background. I studied this, this, and this. Like, we don't want a long, like, history of who you are, because ultimately you're on our time and we want to hire someone who's going to help our business. We don't need to know everything about you right now. So just keep it succinct. Now, the second part of this video is where we're going to look at how to think on your feet. So obviously you will have done a certain amount of research, but no amount of research can prepare you for some questions that are off kilter, especially ones that just come up because of the nature of the role. So for every single question you're asked by the employer, I would implore on you to listen very, very carefully. I would even go as far as to say, paraphrase it back to the employer, because then you'll know if you've understood correctly and you'll be able to judge from their body language if you have or not. When you are thinking about what you're going to answer, please be aware that having stillness and silence is a weapon. The worst candidates I've seen fill up the silence. The best candidates I've seen know how to use a pause and know how to use silence to their advantage. The next tip I'm going to say is, if you're asked an awkward question, answer honestly, but obviously not too honestly. Communication is extremely important, and I'll give you an example. If the employer says, would you be okay, and this is a question I was asked, would you be okay with being in the office every day? So for me personally, I'm not okay with that. I have a dog. So I answered honestly. I said, I understand that if the nature of the role requires me to be in the office every day, then perhaps this isn't the role for me. Personally, based on my own circumstances, it's not feasible for me to be here every day. I live very far away, also have a dog, and I actually think I work far better in a hybrid sense. I actually get more done remotely. It's unfortunate if that's a requirement of the role. And that was what I said. I didn't get the job because I wasn't able to commit to the every day in the office. And that's okay, because it's just not for me. And I was very honest about it, and I was glad I was honest about it then, because that would have caused immense trouble for me and the employer down the line. You'll see that I'm like, no, I understand if it's part of the role, then it's part of the role, but that's not what I want. And I was very upfront, and I wasn't like dismissive of their policy, even though I would like to be dismissive of their policy and argue that it's not how I would do things, but it's how they do things, and you have to understand it's their prerogative to do that. And on that point, my last piece of advice would be know when to stop. See, I gave 3 sentences there. You go, well, you know, and I just think from my point of view, you know, given that COVID's gone on and given that people should be given more leeway working from home, you know, obviously then I would be dead in the water. So just know when to stop, be very attentive to your own voice and be like, no, I'm good. So yeah, a succinct guide to why you fail interview. Those are some of the points I've picked out. I hope it helped you. I hope you learned something from this, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.